let's talk about Red Tail Hawk and their upcoming EP, King Kong. So King Kong is a 3-track suite off of an upcoming album by Red Tailed Hawk. Now, Red Tailed Hawk is a Massachusetts-based band, according to their Bandcamp, which seems a little bit out of date, so I'm not entirely sure. It says they're from Newburyport, Mass. They've played up and down the North Shore before the pandemic. I've personally seen them at the Grog in Newburyport and at Toad in Cambridge, but they've also played in Portsmouth and Newmarket, New Hampshire, along with other places. So they're kind of all over the North Shore and the Massachusetts, New Hampshire kind of border. So they have had 2 albums come out so far to date. They've had their first album come out, Night Soup, in 2016, and their second album just came out last summer of 2020, and that's called Strokes. And they've had at least 1 EP, maybe 2, I'm not actually sure, and they've had singles come out as well. So this EP, King Kong, is a small section of their upcoming album, which I don't know the name of the upcoming album, but this is a sort of a sampler of things to come. It's not a EP where someone puts out an EP to show, hey, this is something we've been working on, kind of hinting at what we're putting out. This is more of a direct teaser to what's coming out on their newest project. So the first impression I have before I even talk about any of the tracks by themselves is the fact that this EP is hinting at a sonic change for Red Tail Hawk. A lot of their previous music is smoother, it's more reggae-like. They kind of were departing that with their previous album, Strokes, but if you go back to their earlier stuff, it's very much rocksteady, reggae-influenced, kind of bouncy feeling. This is much funkier. This is much more of a callback sort of to the 70s a little bit. It doesn't feel like it would fit perfectly in the 70s, but it feels very much influenced by a lot of funk music that was coming out in that time period, as well as some experimental jazz. So that is my very first impression from this EP, is that this is a changing of style. This is going to be a distinctly different album from this group. So the instruments on all these tracks, before we jump into each one by one, they pretty much have the same instruments throughout. There are some minor discrepancies. I know the instruments listed on the front cover of the EP, which I will put on the screen somewhere, are a little bit different from what I'm going to say, but I know I'm hearing some other things in here that weren't listed. For example, there is a pan flute that is in, 3D Lady and King Kong that I'm almost 100% sure is a pan flute and is there. And I don't think that's listed on the EP cover. But there is also, there's a saxophone, there's electric bass, there's also possibly synth bass parts or just a heavily distorted electric bass. There's percussion, there's electric guitar, and there's also a vocal part on the last track, Nasty, which is, well, we'll get into that later. There's some minor vocals in here too. So for the first track, 3D Lady, my first impressions from it are that it has a smooth but funky feel, which is that kind of, they don't really go well together as words, but for the track it does go well together. I can't think of a better description. I think it's a good transition point from what they've done before to what they're going to, or at least what it sounds like they're going to, at least for the rest of the EP. We'll put it that way. It's a good transition point. Something that definitely caught my ear was the fact that there is this pan flute part underneath, the horns, or the saxophone, and it's unstable. I don't know if anyone's ever played a pan flute that's watching this or listening, but they're, at least in my very brief experience with them, they're very tough to play, and get them to be in tune and in key all the time, and that's definitely noticeable on this, but it's not something negative. The dissonance you're getting from this, the sax note that's right on with like the bass and like the guitar, and then you have this pan flute that's just off. It's just kind of rubbing against it in an uncomfortable way, but it's satisfying. I don't know how to describe it more than that, but it's an interesting choice, and I think they pulled it off pretty well. So that would be something to keep your ears tuned for. You'll hear it. It's noticeable, and you won't not hear it. But if you're wondering what that is, I think it's a pan flute. Overall, if I needed a word for this track, I would describe it as, and in a good way. I know I'm using a lot of weird descriptions here, but I would describe it as squirrely. It seems like it's all over the place, but it's not. It's definitely cohesive. It's got a, it knows what it wants to do. It's on track. It's very tight, but it's kind of wriggling all over the place, which is cool too. I don't know, maybe squirrely isn't the best word. I'm going to stick with it. It's what I'm trying to say with it is very active, but determined. Something that's also interesting just for all these tracks, but definitely noticeable on this one, 3D Lady, is the production sounds like they did a sort of live in studio sort of thing where everyone was playing at the same time. That could not be the case. They could, they could layer some things over it after the fact, like maybe the pan flutes were dubbed over. But it's nice that during the pandemic where we can't go to shows, we can't go to a bar and listen to live music, we can't go to a small venue, we can't go to a large venue either. It's nice that you can get this sort of live sort of experience, auditory experience that you can bring home. And I do like that. I enjoy that a lot. And there's subtle things in there like the fact that they just feel like, it sounds like a band that has practiced this over and over and it's just really tight and playing it live. And there's other cues, like there's some subtle counting going on in the middle of the track where a lot of instruments fall out and there's just a couple left playing. You can hear like a 1, 2, 3, kind of like that. Or even just the breathing, like that rhythmic counting breathing, if you know what I'm talking about. It was a nice touch. I don't know if it was intentional, but it was good. I liked that. As for the second track, King Kong, there is also pan flutes here, but that's not the most noticeable thing of this track. The most noticeable quality of this track, and I think the standout bit, the thing that really captures it for me, is they have a transition from sort of a jazzy, funky kind of build-up breakdown, is they have this transition into a spaghetti western meets funk sort of section, which is an odd combination of two genres that you don't expect to hear in the same song. But it works really well. You have that bright, twangy, tremolo electric guitar sound that you would hear in an old western, and then you have a funk jazz sound going on the other side, on the other section of the song, and it works really well. I'm impressed that they put those two together and they made it work. The last track, Nasty, is, as the title suggests, it is nasty. It is a very sweaty song. It's most certainly supposed to be intimate. It is a loud song. It opens up with screaming saxophone parts. And there is a very thick groove going on underneath it. Yeah, it's definitely an in-your-face kind of song. Yeah, it's punchy, intimate, sweaty, groove. I would use odd sort of comparison, but it feels like something you might hear in a 1990s indie film that is set in California. Not filmed not set in the 90s, but filmed in the 90s. I don't know, I'm just getting that kind of sound and that kind of picture put in my mind that's what this would kind of call back to, or that is what this song would fit really well with. I can't think of any films in particular, unfortunately, but that's just what's in my mind. the vocals on this too, there are vocals. This is the only track on the EP that does have vocals. They're very minor. It's just kind of spoken, or sung spoken really. They're not, it's not like a melody like you would usually think of a vocal part. They're just kind of adding some tension and feelings to the track to get you to be like, yes, this is a song that is supposed to be like intimate and like nasty and funky. Like one of the lyrics, the most prominent one is like, I want to make you sweat. Like, you know what the song's about. I will say though that the vocals could be brought up in the mix a little bit before that, because I can't hear some of them. Some of the lines, they get muddled by the rest of the song. So I would say either bring those up or get rid of them, as that would be my only knock against the production of this track, is just I can't hear all the vocal parts. But otherwise, a very good track. I also did like how the song ended on a sort of somber, suspenseful note. After being a very funky and nasty track, you have this sort of, where we're going to kind of go note from here, which I wonder if this is the introduction in the upcoming album, The Pool, or if this is midway and this is a transition, or if this is the end. It'd be interesting to hear when we hear the rest of the album, to see the context of where this EP fits in the project. But for the time being, I did like how the song ended as well, which is some minor thing, but I liked it. I enjoyed it. Overall, I would like to say that I did like the EP quite a bit. Very fun to hear. I will say that I wish it was longer, because there's a lot of ideas that I was really interested in, especially on the first and the last track. But I felt like they sort of just ended really quickly, and I wanted to hear more. I feel like these are great structures to build off of in a live setting, which, from what I can recall of Red Tail Hawk when I saw them live, it seems like that's what they kind of like to do, is they like to, expand a little bit and improvise or work off something they might have worked, maybe they think of something later on after they've recorded the track and build off it. I don't know, but it seems like these 3 tracks are a nice frame to start with, and they would be a great place to build up and go longer with them. But I wish they were a bit longer, because I want more. So that's something I will say. They are surprisingly deliberate as well, though, which I don't mean that as a knock, like, oh, based on their previous work, but more as because quick aside, I had heard them live, and they'd come into our studios before, and I've heard some of their tracks, but I hadn't really gone through a lot of their discography. So in the process of doing this review, I went back and I listened to a lot of their stuff, and I was just surprised at how deliberate a lot of this album feels for an artist of this stature. I spend a lot of my time listening to music, and I like to look for smaller artists when I can, because sometimes you can hear some really weird things that way. But usually you don't. Usually you hear very mediocre, sort of lackluster, pitter-pattering. And that is not the case with this project or this band. They're very deliberate in what they put together. They know what they want to say, or they know what kind of sound they want to put across, and they do it. And, I was just surprised that This was so well put together. I didn't expect less, but I'm still just surprised because there's so many bands out there, so many musicians, and I was pleased with it. Yeah, so overall, I would say that this project is most definitely worth a listen if we're using a binary scale. I don't use a number sort of scale. I'm not really great with that. But this is definitely worth a listen. Check it out. It comes out on February 19th, 2021, and it is a preview of what is to come out on their next album, their third full-length album, The Pool, which, based off what we heard here, I think we can expect a very funky project. I'm thinking it's going to be mostly instrumental based off this. Maybe not, but I think it's going to be mostly an instrumental project. And I'm excited because when you decide to do a mostly instrumental project, the instruments get a time to shine in which they usually don't in most songs that have a lead vocal. And I like both. But it's a refreshing thing because you don't hear a lot of instrumental music, at least on the charts these days. I mean, there's EDM, which does do that, but outside of stuff like that, like dance music, not really that common to hear it on the charts. So this is something that, I'm looking forward to, and I think you should keep your ears peeled for it. So again, this was Red Tail Hawk. This is their new EP, King Kong. And again, it is February 19th, 2021, when it is going to be live for listening.